Hi everyone, this is Jim Tolles. I blog regularly at spiritualawakeningprocess.com and I'm a spiritual teacher and a healer. Today I want to talk about connecting to your heart wisdom. This is something that I don't think gets enough appreciation on the spiritual path. I think some people talk about the heart and I think they do a good job of talking about the heart, but feeling from that space and moving from that space in a wise way, in a way that's an integrity and it isn't just sloshing around through the vagaries of the emotions, is a very different thing. It's a very different feeling. I often talk about the spiritual path that as we integrate into ourselves, into really owning all aspects of ourselves in a wise and awake way, in a wise, conscious way, you have to understand things fully in the mind, in the heart, in the body, and in many respects in the energy field, which is a whole other subtle level that I can talk about in another video. But coming into the heart is a really, really important thing, and I think culturally speaking, it's just something that's been completely forgotten. On the one side, you'll have a lot of people who are just very emotional. This isn't heart wisdom. This is just being lost in the seas of emotions. And emotions are always changing, right? Depending on the story. If a story in our life is going well, so somebody says something nice to us, that's the story is going the way that we want it to go. Then we're like, oh, now we're happy. And so our heart gushes out and happiness spews in all sorts of directions. And we feel great. And then, somebody walks by and they, flip us off or they yell at us, right? That's not going according to the story we want to have in our life. So our heart closes up, and now we're angry, and things are terrible, and the world is full of jerks. And right, so here you have, the immature heart, and this is what a lot of people do. Or it can even be you see somebody in great difficulty, now your heart just gushes, and you feel sad, and you're just feeling all this other person's pain, which isn't your pain. This is what the immature heart likes to do, and you'll actually see a lot of people in the spiritual path who do this, where like, especially in the instance of somebody else who's suffering, it's just like, oh no, this person is suffering, it's so terrible. And while suffering isn't something any of us enjoy, there's a different way of being heart open, uh, and appreciative and understanding of other people's suffering, because it's not going away. If this is the way you are, you just kind of gush out, you are going to be suffering yourself because other people are going to be continuing to suffer for long, long times. This isn't being negative. This is just part of this world. This world lives in pain and suffering. And that's how some of the greatest spiritual truths arise for people, is because the suffering got so, so bad that it finally broke through to the person that they are the problem. They are the problem, not the situation at large. Now, there are difficulties we have. If you have any sort of serious health condition, if you're having trouble having enough food in your life, these are very serious issues. But the suffering that gets built up is through the mind talking about how bad life is. Whereas when you deal with these difficult things that are very painful, you have to take it moment by moment and address those things. And that's a very different way of being about it. So you're not getting lost in a story that life should be any different or any better. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't strive for like better health or strive for having more regular food if you're not getting enough food. It's just a completely different way of thinking about it, as opposed to being lost into the misery of, this is my lot in life, the victim identity that may come up, or, somebody who's just overly aggressive and is always fighting and fighting other people, so it doesn't feel these inner stories that say that I'm so out of my luck and so unlucky and so unhappy. So as we start to come into our heart and we start to connect to this wisdom, the first step really is just to pay attention to what's there. For many people, they've never even done that. They've been masking it with the mind, right? The mind is talking through everything and coming up with all of its stories. And this happens regularly in the spiritual path, where people are too busy talking about what is truth. But the truth of the matter is they don't know what's in their heart. So who cares about the intellectual answer to what is truth? It becomes a game. It's another way that the mind can take a really helpful question and beat it to death and make it absolutely useless and nonsensical, because it's so busy dealing with this, as opposed to saying, well, the truth is you need to understand your heart. What are you feeling? And a lot of people are going to find a lot of upset emotions down there. You're still feeling the pain of difficulty you had growing up with your father. It's still there. And that's why you ran to your head, because some of the pain of that relationship was so bad that you couldn't be emotionally open, especially with maybe men in your life. I don't know. I'm just using it as one example. And so you hid in your head, And so you always had ideas and ways of thinking about stuff, and you could kind of hide from it. And so breaking open those ideas becomes kind of the gateway to getting down into your heart. And a lot of what happens for people, especially in spiritual awakening, is they go through a cycle of grieving. And it's not because they're now miserable in their hearts, it's because there is already misery in their hearts. This is just such one of the big things about awakening, that really it is just shining a light on what's already here. It hasn't brought in more misery. And I think people are so caught up in the duality, anytime something shifts or changes in their life, they want to blame the external shift or whatever that changes. And people do this with awakening, which is a little ridiculous. And so coming into the heart, you're going to notice that it's an untended field, because a lot of people have ignored it. On the other side are the people who've been running around through all the emotions of the heart like this, like ping pongs, going back and forth, happy, sad, up, down, mad, indifferent, just rolling around through it. And so for them, having some of the mind come in to start to create safer boundaries for, how are we going to approach life? How are we opening ourselves appropriately? How do we not open ourselves to things that don't actually support us? And that's that setting of boundaries. So you make a safe space for the heart to flow naturally. And over time, what happens is you start to really understand what you feel. Now, it sounds kind of strange to say that initially people don't know what they're feeling, but they don't. Because it's all caught up in all these different layers and different stories and stories on top of stories. So you're kind of peeling away all these layers to find out what is the truth of the matter. And often as you get closer to the truth of the matter, you start to find lots of layers of fear around the heart. And the fear is keeping you from doing a lot of different things. But it's through that fear that you have to go to start to find out what you really care about. And it's strange, because what ends up happening is fear constricts more closely around things you actually want. And maybe this isn't like this for everyone, but I've definitely seen it in myself and other students and other friends, that the closer you get to the things that actually matter to you, that are really in your heart, the harder the fear is, and it kind of like tries to repel you from it. So you're trying to repel you from it. So I can think of an example of one person who knows she needs to make a career change. She knows she has to do it. She knows it in her heart, but as she starts to get closer, you can see all this emotion, all this fear and sadness starts to well up. And it's kind of the reverse amount of energy needed to hold down the amount of energy that wants to come up. So this is where you actually start to step into a little bit of body wisdom, where the body moves through sensation, through action, and doing stuff in this world, where you have to step into that space in your heart and to do what you're scared to do. This, of course, is always subtle work, and you're always kind of learning about, well, what is good fear? What is fear that's keeping me away from something that's actually dangerous? And it's just kind of an inappropriate way of making myself pay attention. The more you pay attention to your inner knowing, right? And that's kind of what runs through all the wisdom. It's just this deep inner knowing that's integrated, that doesn't really localize in the mind or the heart or the body. It's just kind of everywhere. That inner knowing, that intuition that says, this is where I should go. You have to listen to it. The more you listen to it, the more fear doesn't come up around it. It starts to be separate from it. You can start to see how different they are. But a lot of times fear and instincts are kind of balled up with intuition. It makes everything really muddy. So those are kind of some steps around listening to your heart. Is first you have to start listening, and then it gets messy for a while. And for some of you, if it's already messy, then you're setting up appropriate boundaries and really starting to pay attention to what feels good to you. On a deeper level, what is supporting you and what is not. And that alone, that step can take you quite a bit of time. It's like, I can say this in 5 minutes, but that's a step that you can end up spending 5 years, 10 years, your whole life really working with, depending on your lessons in this lifetime. And any amount of time frame is fine. So any part of the ego is like, well, I got to get this heart wisdom thing down so I can move on to the next thing. It's like, that's not how it is. Typically what happens is we kind of move through different layers. And so you'll kind of move through the heart, head, and down the body and the energy, and then you cycle back up, or you go to the heart, to the body, and then you come to the head, and then you spend a lot of time in kind of energetics and psychic awareness and things like that. So it has its own wisdom, and that's also part of connecting to your heart wisdom and any of the wisdom inside you, because you're full of wisdom, actually, is you have to trust it and just keep watching the process and being engaged with the process at the same time. So I hope these are some helpful ideas for you around connecting with your heart wisdom. You can always find what I'm up to at spiritualawakeningprocess.com. I hope you have a beautiful day.